Hey, this is Borin Doulos with the Creative Ache Podcast, where we discuss the God-given passion, pain, and purpose for the creative individual. Hello and welcome to the Creative Ache Podcast. I'm your host, Borin, and I am a multi-instrumentalist, singer, songwriter, and composer, as well as a musical intercessor at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, Missouri. I have several music albums under varying artists and genres available wherever you stream music. And with this podcast, it's my desire to encourage and exhort artistic people to faithfully steward their God-given creative ache. Now today will be the final episode in our 4-part series based on the message in Esther 4:14 to creative people. And in previous episodes, we have focused on your generational assignment, how you are called and equipped to reach this generation specifically with your artistic assignment. We also covered your creative voice as a God-designed artistic expression, how it's uniquely crafted for a certain creative purpose. And of course, last week we discussed the consequences of not faithfully stewarding your creative assignment. Out of Esther 4:14, we're going to focus on a 4-letter word that is intrinsically related to who you are and your creative expression. And that word is time. Now, before we get into this episode, I wanted to share with you a really cool story. Last week, I mentioned the ripple effect or the butterfly effect of our art. Well, a few days ago, I was talking with one of my neighbors. He's a non-believer, and I was telling him sort of my testimony, and also he's an artist. And I told him about some of the things we discuss on this podcast in God's design for the creative individual. And I also gave him the information on how to find some of my music, particularly the artist Esther, where I write and record all of the music and lyrics. It's a Christian experimental rock genre. Well, this morning, he came to me. He was really excited to let me know that he listened to my music, and he said that he actually really liked the song called Another King's Crown, and he liked it so much that as he would play this song, he started a new painting that he was inspired to paint. Now this guy, he paints on canvases that are like taller than me, so very big paintings. He showed me a picture of this new painting he's working on out of his inspiration that he got from this song. And it was really moving, and it was stunningly accurate too, from a non-believer, what he was getting from my music and then expressing in his own art. That was so encouraging to me, and I wanted to share it with you as a testimony that when you're faithful to create, you just never really know the ripple effect that's going to come about because of your faithfulness. You don't know how you're going to touch people, change their lives, and even cause them to function in their God-given creativity. So now let's talk about Esther 4:14 and wrap up this series. So I'm going to read it again. This is Mordecai speaking to Esther, saying, "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows if you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this." Now there's that 4-letter word, time. We're going to be laying out some deep concepts, which has kind of been the theme of this podcast so far. But I also want to get very practical. Time is a very important concept in how it relates to you and your creative abilities and assignment. Now, I'm sure you've heard it said that time is the only resource that you always spend and you can never get back. And that's what I want to focus on today. You see, God puts you in this time, this moment. You were born for such a time as this. Another way to say it is that you wouldn't fit in any other time. I know sometimes some of us might feel like that we're ahead of our time or that we're an old soul, but the truth is the grand designer of this whole thing put you right where he wanted you, and he gave you what you would need to be the most fruitful and effective for his kingdom in this time. Now, this verse is a powerful reminder of the impact that one person can have on the world around them. The story of Esther teaches us that we are placed in specific circumstances at specific times for a purpose by God. Now, as artists, we have the ability to use our creativity to make a difference in the world around us. But how do we make the most of our time as artists and ensure that we're using our time for God's creative purposes? Time is one of those things that we have absolutely no control over. There are many things that we have limited control over, but time is something we cannot stop and we cannot change. The only thing we can do is choose to steward the time that we're given. And especially today where there's so many things going on that want to grab for our attention, for our time, it's vitally important that we as creative people know how to enter the grace of God, to overcome the distraction, and to pursue faithfulness with our time. So, what does it mean to not only be in the right place, but at the right time? How can we recognize the opportunities for artistic creation that are before us? And how can we respond to them in a way that aligns with God's plan for our creative lives? This really requires wisdom, because as every day passes, so do opportunities. So does the potential that we have as creative people. I'm reminded of Psalm 90, verse 12. This was written by Moses, and he says this wonderful phrase as a prayer to God. And he says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." This to me is astounding. It's tying together the wisdom of God with the timing of God. In order to understand our time, we have to have wisdom. And in order to get divine wisdom, we have to understand time. Time is the one thing that if I could take it away from you, you would cease to matter. Think of your creative abilities. Think of people like Beethoven. He had amazing musical talent and skill. And even when his hearing was taken away from him, he still composed works that are regarded as some of, if not the most impressive pieces of musical art that the world has ever seen. I've seen painters without hands. I've seen writers that are blind. But time is the thing that makes you relevant. Time is the thing that makes you, you. If I take away time from you, you no longer exist. I say all that to highlight the importance of the time that God the Father decided to give you. You have no control over how much time you have, but you are required to steward that time for His glory. And every day that you make a concerted effort to steward your time as an artist is another day that builds faithfulness, which brings fruitfulness. Seeing the time God has given us as a non-renewable resource, a limited opportunity, is the first step in accessing the grace needed to faithfully steward our time to be creatively fruitful. Our fruitfulness is totally dependent on our faithfulness with our time. Imagine yourself at the end of your life, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, and think of what it would look like if you lived a life full of artistic faithfulness. Imagine the works that you have released to the world. Imagine the things that you created out of faithfulness to the Father. Now imagine how you could do that without being faithful with your time. It's impossible. The only way that you can reach that pinnacle of your artistic expression is by using your time to get there. Now, this is challenging. Many creative people have a hard time, no pun intended, stewarding their time. I am definitely guilty of this. It is very easy for me to either busy myself with things that seem good but are actually distracting, or to just waste time altogether. But it's my endeavor and my desire to reach into the grace of God to change these things so that I can faithfully produce creative fruit. But this requires diligence, this requires perseverance, and I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit, but this requires schedule and routine, which again is very hard for most creative people. Let me paint a picture for you. It can be a very sobering thought when you add up the time, hours and days that your creative potential is being wasted. You might think of it as putting your creativity on the back burner or setting it on the shelf. But again, the time that you spent not being creative is time that you will never have again. So this might be a stretch for some of us, but just imagine for a second if you spent around 2.5 hours a day wasted. Really think about it. Combine your time on Netflix, social media, YouTube, mindlessly scrolling. 2.5 hours a day really doesn't seem like much. But if you add that up over 10 years, it equals about 380 days of wasted time. That's over 1 year of awake time that you will never get back. Conversely, let's think about that time being applied to creativity. Just imagine how much more art would be radiating out of you at the end of that 10-year cycle. There's a quote by a guy that I want to share with you. His name is Tiago Forte, and I don't really know much about him personally, but he's the author of a book and a system called Building a Second Brain. What I want to share with you is this powerful quote. You see, Tiago's father was a professional painter. And what he said is, "My father is one of the most productive people I have ever met." People would often have this image of my father. Oh, he must be so imaginative, just wandering around the house, head in the clouds, and that just could not be further from the truth. He continues, in order to do his art and to be prolific with 4 kids, he had to have rules and routines and structure. Everything had to be very well planned out. This goes against the grain of what seems right to most of us as creative people. We want to wait for that moment of inspiration. We want to wait for the feeling to arise. But if we do that, I promise you, you are going to waste more of your life not creating anything. We can't leave creativity up to chance. We have to be diligent with our time, with our schedules. One of the greatest musical undertakings that I ever had, I did between 2015 and 2017 when I wrote and recorded my first album for Esther, which again is the artist name of the music that I produce that I referenced at the beginning of this episode. In that time, I would stay up sometimes till 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning on a work day writing music because I was burning with this need to put these songs out. And I did. I put that music out. And it's an accomplishment that I'm very grateful to have done. But there was a period between 2019 and 2022, last year, where I created almost nothing musically. I certainly was not staying up all night creating stuff. And the main reason why is because I would have little inspirations here and there, but I didn't have that feeling fueling me as intensely. Now, something that I have changed in my life since then and have continued to work at refining is choosing to spend time writing music regardless of my feelings. In fact, most of the time, I don't feel it until I'm 20-30 minutes into a writing session that I have planned out and blocked out. I turn my phone and devices on Do Not Disturb. My wife even knows that at these certain times, unless it's an emergency, please don't call me because I am intensely focused. And I've got to say, I have created far more refined art in this time. Most of it is not out yet, but I've definitely created a lot more, a lot faster, and it's been a lot more refined because I have been diligent about planning my day by day and setting aside specific time to write music. So here's another question that I want you to ponder. What would happen if you stopped putting off your creative ideas and started making time, forming a schedule, routines to bring those ideas into reality? You see, your life's greatest work will not likely be the fruit of your most wildly inspired moment. It will more likely be the fruit of diligent, focused, applied time that is spent faithfully stewarding your creativity. Here's some very practical help, and this is what I do. Give yourself at least 90 minutes a day of focused, creative work, free of distraction. Treat it as a matter of stewardship to God. 5 days a week, I set aside 90 minutes to do nothing but write music, regardless of how I feel. And 2 days a week, I double that. I require at least 180 minutes of focused creative work from myself. Saturdays and Sundays, I take off from this time, but I actually don't go a single day without writing something musical, even if it's just a lyric on a Saturday or just a little guitar riff for a piece that I've been working on. It doesn't even have to be a final product or anything like that, but I at least do something. Now, I'm not saying that faithfulness looks like that. I mean, that can be pretty extreme for many people's schedules. You don't have to do that. To me, I actually feel like it's not enough, and I want to actually be even more focused during those 90 minutes. I get pretty distracted easily, and I actually want to spend even more time writing music. I feel like for me, that is a matter of faithfulness. But my point is simply this: in order to steward your gift, you're going to need to steward your time, which means you're going to need to be creative. Regardless of how you feel, regardless of inspiration, you're going to need to be creative based on a routine, on a schedule. And if you haven't yet been doing this, I promise you, just try it for a couple of weeks and you will be shocked at the amount of creative content that you're able to produce. So in closing, I want to leave you with this. If you will rule the time that you were given, instead of letting time rule you, you will bear incredible artistic fruit. So let's embrace the idea that we have been placed in this world for such a time as this, and use our talents and creativity to make a difference in the lives of those around us, and ultimately be faithful to the Father who gave us creative abilities and time to use them for His glory. Thank you so much for listening. At the time of this recording, we've almost had 100 downloads of this podcast, and it would be so wonderful if by this Saturday, February 11th, you would share this podcast with your friends, with your family, with any creative people that you know, so that we can reach that 100 download mark. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to be updated whenever I release a new episode. And follow me on Instagram at Borin Doulos Music. I would love to connect with you and continue this creative journey together. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on the next episode of the Creative Ache Podcast.